Okay, great dafim today. Continuation of what we began yesterday, which is the dafim of tzedakah. And today's daf is Kesubos Daf Samach Ches, and we will begin Samach Zayin Amud Beis, the second wide line here. It's the second wide line. Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Again, we're dealing with the mitzvah of tzedakah, and we're dealing with different types of people that need tzedakah. But what do you do if they don't want to accept? So Taner Rabbanan, the Brisa says, Ein loy, a mensch that doesn't have money. He's starving. The Eina writes his parnes, and he's a person that doesn't want to take tzedakah. So what do you do with such a person? So the Reb Meir says, Noistim loy l'shum halva. If you know that, just offer him a loan, and when he takes the loan, then you give it to him as a gift. Then you don't collect it. You say, you don't come after him to pay the loan. Divrei Meir. Chacham says, you give it to him as a gift. You give it to him as a gift. Then you give it to him as a loan. So wait a second, the Chachamim make no sense. We're talking about a guy who doesn't like to take anything from tzedakah. L'shum atana, you first offer him for a gift, alay shakal, he's not going to take it. Rava says the Chachamim have a different psychology to deal with somebody like this. Again, this is a type of person that knows that needs the tzedakah but doesn't want to take it. So first you open him up and you say, we want to give you a gift. Of course, he's going to refuse. So once you're in the conversation, they're going to say, okay, use it as a loan. And if you're going to use it as a loan, fine, then he'll be agreed to take it, and then you don't collect it from him. So it's a certain psychology how to deal with some people who need money, and they have such a low self that they don't want to even accept its tzedakah. New Gemara. Hi, Lewis. We're 4 lines from the wide lines on Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Yeshloi, suppose you have a guy who has money, but he's so karg. Karg is a Yiddish word for stingy. And he's starving himself. The Eina writes his parnes and doesn't want to take tzedakah. So he's really, really starving himself and putting himself at danger. He's a mental case. So noisnin loy l'shematana, you first give it to him tzedakah, you give him the tzedakah, and then you recollect it from him. You can a month later you come back and collect it him. So the Gemara says, if you're going to collect it back from him, because really he's a rich guy, Sulai Shakal he's never going to take again. And then he's going to further starve himself to death. This guy is starving himself to death, but he has a big bank account. What do you do with such a person? Omar Papa said, you give him the money, tzedakah, La'achamisa, when he passes on, he dies, then you collect it from the Yarshim, all the tzedakah he collected during his lifetime that he didn't really need. Rab Shimon says no. If he has money in the bank, everybody knows he has a couple of apartment buildings. The Eina writes to the Sparnis. He's starving himself and doesn't want to take tzedakah. You don't have to pay attention. If he starves himself to death, that's too bad on him. The writes to the Hispanes. If he doesn't have and he doesn't want to take, again, bring a mashkin. We're going to lend you money. Bring a mashkin. Of course, he's not going to have a mashkin, but he sees that he's going to take a loan, and once he comes to give a collateral for the loan, he's going to say I don't have. Then he says, okay, take it without collateral. We trust you this time, and then you don't collect it back from him. So he should calm down and not feel so bad that he has to take money. The rabbis taught, Have. The Torah tells you how to deal with somebody that needs tzedakah. Have means to lend them money. It's talking about a guy who doesn't have. The Ein writes to the Spanish doesn't want to take tzedakah. Then you try to arrange a loan for him. If he doesn't want to take tzedakah, try to get him to loan the money from you. Then give it to him as tzedakah. Taviteno. Tavitena means you loan somebody who does have money and doesn't want to take from tzedakah. You give him the tzedakah, but really it's as a tzedakah. He thinks in his lifetime it's tzedakah. And when he dies, then you collect it after his death from his Yarshim. Rabbi Yehuda. The Chacham said what Rab Shimon says. if you're dealing with a person, yeshloi, that has a loads of money, a couple of apartment buildings, he doesn't want to, he's starving himself and he's not benefiting from his own money. You don't pay attention to him. The Torah says you can lend to a poor person, and Pashtus, the Torah is telling you, lend to a rich person who doesn't want to use his own money. So the Chachamim and Rab Shimon argue on that. They say the Torah is speaking like humans speak. That sometimes you double what you're saying, but that's not the proper thing. You don't have to worry about somebody who is so stingy on himself. The Gemara continues and says a story. Mar Ukva, this person called Mar Ukva, great Amora, there was a poor person in his neighborhood. Every single day, this Mar Ukva, every day he would put 4 zuzim in there was like a pocket by the hinge of the door. There was like a place, like a mail slot or something like that. So one day, the poor person said, let me go see who's giving me this money every day. I don't know who he is. That was that day. Ma'utra was delayed in the base medrash, and his wife came to pick him up from the learning. How about that? He finished second seder, and the wife comes. His wife came with him. So they're supposed to go home to eat supper, but they said Mukhav said, I have to drop off this money for this poor person. Kaven the Chazia, the Komatzle Dasha, since the poor person saw that the door started to turn a little bit, he knew that the guy that's putting the money in the slot is right there. Nafik Basrael. So he came outside and started coming to see who he is. Rod Mekame. So Mar Ukva and his wife ran from him. Ayel Lahu, and they ran and they were trying to hide. They ran into Atuna, the Haba Grufa, a furnace that was raked already from coals, but it was still extraordinarily hot to be in that place. The Nura, the fiery coals were taken out. So they're in this, 500-degree temperature furnace. Hava carried the Mar Ukva. So the feet of Mar Ukva started to burn as it singes. Amrle Davisi, so his wife said, his wife's body was not burning. For some reason, she was protected from this fire. She had a zchus of tzedakah. Shkol karech oisav akarech. Put your feet on top of my feet, and you won't get burnt. Chalash daite. So Ukva felt very bad. He sees that his wife is more of a tzedekis than he is. He already in the fiery furnace is burning up, and his feet are starting to burn, and his wife not. So he asked her the question. So she had to explain herself. Why is it this way? Amrle, she said to him, the reason why I have more zechusim with tzedakah is because anar shechichna begabe the beisra. I am accustomed to be around poor people around the house, and I'm giving them ready baked foods, umekavre ahanaisa, so they benefit right away. On the other hand, your version of tzedakah is to give them money, and yet they themselves have to go out and buy the food. So therefore, my merits of tzedakah are greater than your merits, and therefore, my feet are not singed as your feet. As you can see, because Mar Ukva caused the ani to go with his feet to spend the money into the grocery store. So although he had the great merit of giving tzedakah, but it's not as high of a level of his wife who gave ready-made foods for the ani. Now the Gemara asks an important question, but they were practically committing suicide. They go into this furnace. My kulahai. Why would they be allowed to do that? Answers the Gemara, the Amar Mazutra Batuvia Amarav Amila Amarav Kuna Babizna Amarav Shimon Chasida, Amila Amarav Yechna, Mishum Rav Shimon ben Yochai. And Rav Shimon ben Yochai came up with this teaching that said, it should be easier for a person to drop himself into a fiery furnace and kill himself, and don't cause the face of your friend to become white in public. In other words, to embarrass your friend. And therefore, they felt that Mar Ukva and his wife felt that if this poor person, maybe it was a relative, would discover who the person that was dropping off this money, who their benefactor was, they would have been totally embarrassed. So therefore, they didn't want him to see. So Manolan, how do you see that concept? that you could risk your life in order not to embarrass somebody. Mitamar, from Tamar, which we have in the Chumash, Tiksiv, he mitzays. She was ready to risk her life to be dropped into the fire, burnt alive without giving away that the one that she had relations and became pregnant one was her former father-in-law, Yehuda, So that's, you see that in the Chumash. Another story. Mar Ukva Havi Ani B'Shavuse. There was a poor person in his neighborhood. Every Yom Kippur, he needed the extra merits. He sent him 400 zuzim every Yom Kippur. Mar Ukva. Yom Achad Shadin Biad Berei. So Mar Ukva sent the 400 zuz in the hands of his son. Drop off this $400 check to this poor person. Asa Amrle. So the son came back with the money and said, "Like Tzarech, he doesn't need the money anymore. The poor person is not poor." Amar. So Mar Ukva asked the son, "My chazes, what did you see?" He says, "Chazal the komazal yayin yashin." I saw that they're sprinkling old wine around the house or preparing old wine for drinking, which is a very expensive food item, and so therefore he must not be so poor. So you don't have to send him this money. Amar. So Mar Ukva said the opposite. Mefane kulahai, he's so pampered that he needs that. I finu, I'm going to double. V'shadrin in nehalei, I'm going to send him double. So I'm going to send him 800. That's what Mar Ukva said. Then the Gemara tells us this Mar Ukva is the paradigm of a person who dedicated his life to give everything he had to charity as best as he can. Ki kanicha nafshe amar. When Mar Ukva was passing, he said, bring me my booklet. Apparently, he kept careful records of how much tzedakah he gave in his lifetime. Ashkach, he discovered very high amount of money to tzedakah, 7,000 dinari of the highest dinari, millions and millions of dollars. But Amar, he said, Zavai the Kalile v'orcha rechitza. He said that this is a I'm going on a this is a light luggage for this long road. In other words, I'm dying, so therefore and this is all the tzedakah I gave in my lifetime. So he gave away half his money before he died. So the Gemara asks, how are you allowed to give half of your money to tzedakah? Rabbi Loi said, in Ushan they made a rule, if you're giving away your money from tzedakah, don't give more than a fifth. So how is he allowed to do that? So the Gemara says, that's only said 20% is if you're still living. Because maybe you'll lose money and you're going to have to come back to use your money that you have. But if you're dying, less lambar, there's no problem giving away more than 20%. The Gemara continues, Rab Abba, his method of giving tzedakah was he would put money in like a handkerchief, and he would slink it over his shoulder, and he would drop coins around the neighborhood where poor people were, but he would keep an eye out to make sure that no fraudulent people come there and pick up the money that was meant for poor people. So he would probably see if somebody that he recognized who really doesn't have to pick up this money, he would chase him away. So he kept one eye out. The best way is he's giving tzedakah, and then people don't know. He doesn't see who he's giving to tzedakah to, but he did keep an eye out to make sure that nobody who's not worthy would take this tzedakah. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina, here's this story. He would send them 4 zuzim every Erev Shabbos for the Shabbos meal. Remember, we had before, Mar Ukva would give 4 zuzim every single day, which is a large amount. But Rabbi Chanina gave his tzedakah to this poor person on Erev Shabbos 4 zuzim. Yom Echad shadrinin lei be'ad v'esei. So one Erev Shabbos he sent the wife to drop off the money. Asay Amrulay, she came back and said, Lord Sarach, he doesn't need the tzedakah anymore. So the Rabbi Chanina asked, my chazes, what did you see going on that you can right away determine that this person doesn't need tzedakah? So the wife answers, Shamai dahavik Amrulay, I heard them talking, how were we going to eat our meals? We go to Samaches Amar Aleph, Betli Kesef and Betli Zahav. Are we going to eat with a tablecloth made of linen that looks like silver, or made of silk, which looks like gold? In other words, very, very fancy tablecloth, which is unusual for such a poor person to have. Amar, so Rabbi Hanina realized that his wife is correct. They're not poor. Amar, he said, Haini the Amar Rabbi Eloi. This is what Rabbi Lazar said. Rabbi Lazar said, "Boi v'nachzik tovei l'ramoin." Let us thank that there are fraudulent people coming around to collect tzedakah. She'ilu moli hein hayinu chaytim b'chol yom. If it wasn't for them, most Jews would sin every day. Because now, if you ask a person why he's not giving his appropriate amount to tzedakah, so the person's knocking on his door, and the answer is, he'll say, I don't trust him. There are people who are fraudulent people who are not supposed to be collecting tzedakah. And this is a bad thing, because if it wasn't for fraudulent people, people would get in trouble. Because if everybody was truthful when they were collecting and you didn't want to give them, the Torah says, normally HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you time to do tshuva. But if you affected a poor person, if he prays out to Hashem and complains to Hashem against you, God will consider it a sin right away to you and wouldn't give you time to do tshuva, and it'll bring down a punishment to you. Now, either they're not going to complain because they'll think that the reason why you're not giving them because you don't trust them, or it's a good excuse to God. We could always say that the reason why I'm hesitant to give out tzedakah to everyone that comes to me, it's because there's many people who are non-deserving. Zog the Gemara. V'tani Rabchia barav b'difte. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Amar. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, "Kol hama'alim einav min tzedakah." Any person who averts his eyes from tzedakah, in other words, he pretends not to pay attention when there's people in need and people in need tzedakah, and he's capable of giving. So, but why is he doing that? Because he wants to keep the money. He feels it more secure in his bank account than to give it away. So the Gemara says, it's as if you are serving idols. You don't believe in God. You don't believe that the money comes from God, and what you have in your bank account really belongs to God. So that's why it's as if you worship idols. It says like here, when the Torah warns somebody that he has these negative thoughts in his mind, that he doesn't want to lend poor people money or he doesn't want to give tzedakah, the Torah uses an expression, be very careful, watch you guard your heart. Maybe you'll have this thought called beli ya'al. Beli ya'al means you don't have a yoke. You don't believe there's a boss up there. So that's what it says by not giving tzedakah. Uksiv Hotsam, it says when it talks about avodah zarah, yatzu anashim b'nei belial, that people who don't have a yoke trying to convince other people to do avodah zarah. So he uses the expression of belial. Malahal, and just like later on, avodah zarah, it's referring to idol worship. Afkan, so also over here, by averting your eyes from tzedakah, it's as if you're oved avodah zarah. Afkan oved avodah zarah. I knew somebody who would say that he was a rich guy, and he as soon as he made money, he would give it out, and he became wealthier and wealthier. They asked him, what's your secret? He says, when I get money, I shovel it out. But then God shovels it back in, and it seems to me that God's shovel is bigger than my shovel. That's what he would say. Also, it says, that the Rebbeinu Shalom has certain amounts of money that he has to give out. And just like say, if you have a good investment, a good hedge fund manager, and you give that person money and he's successful, you want to give him more money. So when God sees that a person gives money to tzedakah, and so he's delighted that I have a good manager over here, so he will trust you with more money. That's how tzedakah leads to higher responsibilities and higher wealth. Tanu Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, Hamasama es einoi. Somebody makes himself blind. Why does he do that? Because he wants to collect tzedakah. He wants people to feel sorry for him. Hamitzabes bitna. He blows his stomach as if he's starving. Where he shrivels he makes his thigh look like it's shriveled up. So basically, he's faking around to imply that he's starving. He doesn't leave this world until this actually happens to him. Fascinating. Hamakabel tzedakah. the ein tzarich l'kach, someone who starts collecting tzedakah and he doesn't need it, soife ein niftam in ha'olam achi yav lidei kach. In the end, whatever he's going to do, he's not going to be matzliach. If you start taking out handouts and you don't really need it, then chas v'shalom, it could lead to bad mazel that Kadosh Baruch Hu will make it that you're going to have to really need it. Tanan Hasan, we learned over there in Masechta Peah. The halacha is that a poor person could collect the matnas aniyim, leket shikha peah, right? That's the part of the gifts to the ani from the field. But that only implies that if you have less than 200 zuz in the bank. But let's say a guy has 199 zuz, so he just makes it under the poverty level, which he's entitled to the program of leket shikha peah. So, but let's say he has stuff that he could sell. We don't require him to sell his house or let's say his bedroom furniture. So said the Gemara, V'loi, you don't require him to sell his bedroom furniture so that he can raise above the threshold, so he's not considered a poor person anymore. But Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, if a guy is poor and he's below the poverty line, if he's using golden goblets, we force him to sell those golden goblets and buy silver goblets. If he was using silver goblets, then you would cause him to use copper goblets. So we do require you to sell. If you're just barely below the poverty level, we would require you to sell your items so that you rise above the poverty level. So how did one Mishnah say you don't require him to sell, and the Brisa says you do require him to sell? Rav Zvi explained, it's the difference what you're asking him to sell. Loikash, it's not difficult. If he's selling the table and the bed, or you're asking him to sell his dishes. Your dishes, you don't ask him to sell. So Gemara says, the cups and the dishes, you don't ask him to sell. It's repulsive to me to sell and buy, inferior quality dishes. So maybe he'll say the same thing. Mita v'shilchan, my table and my bed. I don't want to sell my Stearns and Foster mattress. Nami Omar, he'll say, Zlomi kabi alave. I can't make it on something that's of inferior quality. So how could you force him to sell the bed and the table? Answers the Gemara, no. We're talking about you're selling something that's totally luxurious. A silver comb. You don't need a silver comb. You could get it made a plastic comb. So we force you to sell that. So Rav Papa gives another answer. Like Kash, it's not difficult. If he's really poor, we don't force him to sell anything. But what happens if the guy was a rich guy and he was collecting tzedakah all these years, and then they made an order on him and he was caught that he's really rich. So now they want to collect back all the tzedakah that he stole, basically, all the years that he feigned poverty. So in that case, even if they got him below the poverty line, they will force him to sell to pay back the tzedakah. Because, if somebody who was caught, then we're more stricter on somebody and actually will force him to sell. If he has a fancy bed, a fancy dishes, then whatever he has, we'll force him to sell it because he was caught stealing from the pot when he wasn't supposed to. Okay. By the way, I just meant to point out of Taisus, we do see that in the story of Rav Chanina trusted his wife and said that this person that faked that they were poor, trusted his wife that they're fake. And Mar Ukva, when he found out that the person was drinking old fancy wine, he doubled the tzedakah that he was giving that person. So Taisus explains that there it's because when it's something food related, yes, you can say somebody is pampered and will be hard. That's hard to break from. That's just really what you have to support him with. And if he needs that to have his mental state, then you have to supply that for him. But for what Rav Chanina's wife saw, that these people were just putting wasting it in a tablecloth of a fancy tablecloth made of fine silk and fine silk. So therefore, he recognized that they must be fake, and therefore they're not deserving of tzedakah. New Mishnah. The Mishnah is discussing dowries again. So the Mishnah says, we know that when a father is around, the father is around he does not have to. He does not have to supply a dowry. He can decide what he wants. But so there's no takanas chazal. It's each father can decide what you want to give a dowry for your daughter. However, if a father died and didn't leave explicit instructions what to give for his daughter, so then the halacha says that you're supposed to give 10%. 10% of the assets belong to the daughter as a dowry. Okay, and then it's not like a t'nai ksuba. If the father specifically said before he dies, "Don't give my daughter anything," then you don't give anything when he dies. But we're talking about, unlike you can't say that don't give my daughter food. That's part of the t'nai ksuba. This is like a little different. It's a t'nai ksuba when he doesn't give specific instructions. So again, when a father dies, he left over a daughter, and the daughter gets married. Technically, from the estate, they're supposed to give her 10% of the estate as her dowry. What happens? The Mishnah said, "Yisoima, orphan, shesiyasa ima echel medaita." They married it off when she was a katana, and they married it off. And medata, she agreed to this marriage. The kasvela, the meya b'chamishim zuz. They gave her like 100 zuz or 50 zuz, a very small amount for her dowry. And presumably, because she agreed with it, she's a katana, she said, "Okay, fine, that's good enough for me." When she gets older, she can sue the estate for what she was supposed to give. She could say that I was tricked. I didn't know I'm supposed to get 10%. Rabbi Yehuda, so basically, we always give 10%. That's what the Tanakama says. Rabbi Yehuda says, if you know a guy who, before he died, his oldest daughter got married, and he gave 20% of his assets, or he gave 5% of his assets. Then he died, so now we have a basis of how to determine what type of person he is. Is he generous, or he's not so generous? So therefore, it's not always 10%. He always give what he gave to the first daughter when he was around. So if he gave whatever he gave to the first daughter, after he passes, you give to the second daughter what you gave to the first daughter. Says, sometimes people change their thinking patterns, and therefore you can't always determine just because he gave one daughter a lot. Could be his thinking changed, and by the next daughter he would have gone poor. He would have said, "No, I want to give her less." Basically, you give 10%. And that's what you give to the daughter. You don't start determining what the person was all about. Shmuel said, Shmuel seemed to agree with Rabbi Yehuda. He says, Shmuel, parnasa, for a dowry. Parnasa is another word for a dowry. Shamin ba'av. You go after the father. You try to determine what type of guy is he, stingy or not so stingy. So the Gemara asks, basically, I'll ask you a question. From first, the Gemara asks from a brisa. Habanis nizonis and mispanis and nichse abiyam. Keitzad ein oime olivei kayim kach v'kach hoyin noisun law. El shaman esen chosam v'noisun law. So the Gemara says that this brisa says that when daughters are taking from the estate, you don't try to determine what type of father was he, a generous guy or not a generous guy. You give one price. One normal price that normal people give, which is what the Gemara determines as 10%. My love, don't you think this price is talking about panosas abal, the dowry for the husband for the husband? So we see that we don't go like Rabbi Yehuda, but you rather go like you give one fee of 10%, and you don't try to determine what type the father was. No, like the panosas atzba. This is we're talking about what kind of clothing or what kind of food you're going to give her. So the Gemara says, "Hanizonis umispanis is katani," but the Brisa says two things. You don't determine by the father's type and personality. Nizonis and mispanis katani. My love, achas panosas habal, achas panosas atzma. Doesn't matter what's the food. One's talking about the dowry, and one's talking about her food. And says Gemara, not so. Idi panosas atzma. Both of them are talking about parnasas atzma, which means that you determine what food you're giving her. It's not difficult. It's food, drink, and also what she wears. So, regarding that, you don't make an estimation what type the father is. There must be one price that fits for all girls, how much food they eat and how much clothing they get. But when it comes to dowry, you try to estimate what the father was, how he was, and then that's how you determine the daughter. So the Gemara said, now we learned in the Mishnah, our Mishnah says that the Chacham says that sometimes people are poor and they get rich, and the rich then get poor. The Gemara doesn't understand what the Chacham meant. I spoke it out in the Mishnah, but the Gemara elaborates. My ani, my usher. What does it mean? The Chacham says sometimes people get poor and some people get rich. Are we returning somebody who's poor or wealthy in assets? So what does it mean? The Chacham is saying that you give one price. Michlal, the Tanakama Sovab, the Tanakama will hold Afila Usher, even if he was like a multimillionaire. The Ha'ani, and then he became poor. Kidimikari Avin Allah. We're going to give the same dowry that he gave actually to when he was rich. That's what we're going to give Paul Leslie. But if he actually became poor, then there is no assets to give if he's poor. So Elulav, what the Chachamim mean to say Ani bedas? It's a mental state. He's stingy. Asher bedas. He's not stingy. He's generous. The Chachamim say, what do the Chachamim say? That you can't determine what people are. Just because when they died, you seem to think that they were a generous person, could be that if they still remained alive, they would become a stingy person. So you can't determine just because somebody was generous when they were alive that you continue along that pattern. That's so rather, what do Chachamim say? Shamim esen echasa b'noisen. You make an estimation of the assets and you give her the normal 10%. Almod lo yazlin and basram dana. So we see that we don't go after estimation. We don't try to assess the personality of the father. Tiyofta de Shmuel. This is a refutation against Shmuel. Shmuel is not like the Chachamim. Answers the Gemara, who the Amak Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel went like Rabbi Yehuda, that you do a personality test and you determine what type of guy was he in business. You ask him around, what was he a generous guy in business? Was he good to his employees? If he's a generous guy, then we give a generous dowry for his daughter. It's now we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, if he actually married off a daughter, while he was alive, for the daughter that was the next daughter, after he passed on, you'll give the same what he gave to the first daughter. So if Shmuel was teaching you that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, v'neima halacha Rabbi Yehuda, why did he paraphrase Rabbi Yehuda? Why didn't he say straight out the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Answers the Gemara, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. If he would say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, haba mina dafki hisi the gali dat law, and that Rabbi Yehuda said, how do you determine a personality? You determine his personality by seeing how much dowry he gave to the first daughter that he married off. So I would think that only if he married off a daughter, then you can determine his personality. Kamash Shmuel, so Shmuel says, no, it's not really, you don't need that he actually married her off. You just can determine his personality from other ways. But Tana, the Rabbi Yehuda, Azlin and Basram Dana, the reason Rabbi Yehuda gave is a sample of how would you determine what his personality is. But really, it doesn't matter if they got married, if he married off a daughter when he was alive or didn't. You just determine what type of guy he is. So then why did Rabbi Yehuda say that, if he married off a daughter, you'll give to the second daughter the same? I that Rabbi Yehuda just said that, if he married, so we can assume that he wants to give this second daughter, after he died, the same amount. No, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need that he actually married off a daughter. Rabbi Yehuda says you can, take a personality test from the people he knew and you'll determine what his personality was like. But it teaches you like the strict power of the Rabbanim. The Afagav Be'asiyah Begali died. Even though we already saw he made one chasana when he was alive, you still can't make an estimation that he would have done the same for the second daughter, this next daughter. Could be at that time he was feeling great about himself and he was generous, but could be he would have changed his mind. Amalei Rava said to Rav Chisda, Dashina Mishimcha Halach Rabbi Yehuda. Everybody says that you said the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei, he said, Rava Kol Kihani Mali, so Mishmai. That's a great thing. Let them say such nice things that in my name. I do agree with that the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda, that we give a personality test. So the Gemara asks, Mi Amar Rava Hachi. Did Rava say something like this? Well, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi says, the halacha, halacha is like Rebbe. Rabbi said the halacha is like Rebbe, that every case is always going to be 10%. You don't make personality tests on the father. So how could Rabbi say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara says, like Kasha, it's not difficult. When do you give the 10% is if for, let's say the guy was out of commission for so many years, the father that died, nobody knows who he really is like. If you don't know who he's really like, then you give 10%. But if you're able to determine what type of personality he is, then you go after that and you determine if he's a generous or non-generous person. Okay, now Rebbe himself gave somebody 1/12 of the assets for ksuba, for a dowry. Wait, Rebbe said you're supposed to give 10%, not 1/12. Kashin adadi. So isn't Rebbe difficult? It's contradicting himself? When Rebbe, when he gave 1/12, he made an estimation that the guy was a very stingy guy. So therefore, Rebbe's determined, since I know he was a stingy guy, the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you give according to the estimation of his personality. That's a good proof. If you don't know who he is, then you give 10%. Just a little bit further. If a guy has 10 daughters and you're only giving 10% of the assets each time for each daughter, let's say it's 10 daughters and one son, by the time you go marry off the 10 daughters, there's nothing left for Yerusha for that son. And that the Chachamim would not allow. So he said like this: that means you go to Amud Beis. That means that the first daughter takes 10%, the second daughter takes the remaining 10%. So if the first daughter, let's say there's $1 million, the first daughter will take 100,000, the next one will take 900,000, and the third daughter will take 810,000. But 90,000, the third daughter will take 81,000. But basically, each one takes 10%, and then you pull it all together. You pull it back all together, and then you divide it equally. So the Gemara asks, why do you divide it back all equally? If daughter number one got married, she should get 10% and not have to give it back after she got married. So how could it be that no, you give 10% to the first daughter, and then when all the daughters got married, then you ask them to pull back the asset and split it equally? So the Gemara says, no, this is what we meant to say. If all 10 daughters made a shidduch at one time, imagine that, then you divide it equally. But again, not each one taking 10%, each one taking 10% of the remainder, then you pull it back together, and then you divide it equally amongst the 10. But once that happens, then the son who's left over will have what to have an inheritance from. Matana, if all girls want to take at one time, they take 1/10%. They take one time 10%. So the Gemara says, they take it 10% as if they're all at one. Let us stop over here. We will continue B'ez Hashem tomorrow. We'll catch up with B'ez Hashem tomorrow.